Before we turn the time over to Greg to talk about form resizing solutions, I just want to hit a couple of high points that have popped up recently. We have the modern chart improvements were released to current channel recently. They seem to be humming along pretty well. I haven't heard any feedback in the last week or so regarding them. They seem to be doing well. The Monaco SQL editor was also released in the current channel. And it is off to a little bit of a bumpy start. We've been collecting feedback on some problems that have appeared, but it is out there for you to try if you have the Microsoft 365 on current channel. We have an article on Access Forever about the SQL monitor. So if you haven't tried it yet, I recommend you do. There are some difficulties that are associated with it that I think Microsoft is planning to address, but it is not a perfect solution quite yet. And the other thing that I wanted to touch on is at the recent Access conference in Germany, Karl Donnerbauer's Access conference, the AEK26, Microsoft presented some of their engineering priorities for the near future. I just wanted to touch on a couple of those. First, they have their continued focus on monthly issue fixes, which is an ongoing battle that they're fighting. They announced that they're investigating the possibility of large monitor support for forms. That would include allowing for greater than 22-inch form sizes, I understand, zooming and can shrink, can grow properties so we can get more resizing. And I know that Shane is interested in tonight's presentation because he asked me if it would be recorded. He can't be here, but I guess he's looking for ideas and implementations that they can look into for their project. And the final bit of news out of there is the integrated source code control. And I understand from Tom tonight that they're looking at actually integrating through Git, but that's on the, I guess, the engineering priority plans for the near future that they're going to be looking at reintegrating source code control into Access. And a caveat to all of that, there are no commitments to a timetable, but those are the things that they're currently working on. So I'm pretty excited about that. So with that, I will turn the time back to Greg, let him introduce himself and his topic, which is modern access interfaces, form resizing solutions. Take it away, Greg. Thank you.
Great, thanks, George, and thanks for everybody for turning up. So, yeah, so today we'll look at form resizing, and it's just part of sort of an interest that I've developed in trying to make Access look better and be a bit more visually more functional. So, and it follows on from sort of presentation I did last year, and then an early one where I try to cover some design ideas. So my kind of passion is making Access just look better. I think it doesn't look great out of the box, but there are things we can do to make it look better. But and as I say in any presentation I'll give going forward, you know, I'm just a guy. I have some ideas, but you don't have to agree with them and you don't have to adopt them. But I'm just doing sort of kind of things that have seemed to have worked for me. Just starting the presentation on form resizing. So the question is why? And the issue is that you develop a solution which works on your screen, and when you take it to a client, it doesn't work so well. And some clients have staff who have they might have older screens that have very poor resolution. So your forms that you develop might not render the way that you designed them, and they might not even fully show on the client screen or the user screen. And this sort of journey to develop this form resizing was actually done because I had a client in that situation. So what can happen to your design on low resolution screens? So here we have an example, and the image is of a demo application. Then we have a menu here. If you look up in the top left-hand corner, an alerts menu. It's just a dummy menu, and it all fits on the screen. And that's because it's been resized when it opens, even though we're on a sort of low resolution screen. If you look at the top right-hand corner, you see the display resolution's 1400 times 1050. And then, so watch what happens to this menu bar of icons when we move to the subform that is not resized. It's completely off the screen. So you look at the time icon at the right there. If we switch to this alerts no resize submenu, you'll see that the design no longer fits within the bounds of the screen. So that's the kind of thing that can happen when you take your application to a user screen or a client screen. So here's an example of a continuous form, and it's been resized. And this is an example when it's not resized, so it's completely off the screen. And in fact, the close icon, if I go back here, there's a close icon. You can't see it there, but it's at top right. This little door icon to close the form. That icon is actually completely off the screen, so you couldn't even close the form. So what I've done for the demo app is put a little escape button in the middle, the top there, in red, so we can actually close the form. So just credit, when I was looking around for this to start this form resizing, I had it attempted probably 6, 7, 8 years ago, and it didn't work out very well for me. And then I found this code by Jamie Zernick, which apparently dates back to 2003. So that was my starting point. But when I tried to apply it, it didn't work in all situations. But anyway, it was a good starting point. So the thing is, okay, before we code, maybe there's some things that we consider. So before we code a solution, there's some things that we could look at in terms of the client's setup. So check your existing screen resolution. So go into display settings and have a look at the scale and look at scale and layout. Sometimes users will have goofy kind of settings, things like 150% zoom. And so the zooming, this zooming setting that you see at the bottom where it's shown at 125%, that actually increases or decreases the screen real estate. So just have a look at that first. So try and get the best out of your existing screen. And then the other thing is consider purchasing better screens. So, screens are not that expensive these days, but when clients have a lot of staff, they may not want to, they might not want to go and purchase a whole bunch of screens. So the thing is, okay, if you were in terms of cost, if you're developing the solution from scratch for the client, you'd say to the client, well, this is going to cost you more than it would to replace the screens. But if you already have the solution, then you don't have to worry about the client's screen so much. So some points, decent screens are quite cheap to buy. Check your resolution, but the client may have many users with older low res screens, so there's a budget issue there. The premise of the coding solution for poor resolution screens is to compare the screen dimensions of the user and the developer, and you get a ratio. You know, what's the ratio difference between the client screen resolution and the developer screen resolution, and then you apply that ratio to all to the form and all of its controls. That's the basic premise. That's the starting point. And it's so simple, right? But it doesn't work out when you just sort of code it that way. That's the foundation, but there are some tricks. In terms of using the solution, there's some assumptions that you've designed the form to work on your screen. It all looks good on your screen. Okay, if you've got a poor design, it, you know, it's not gonna it's not gonna make your design look any better in terms of spacing. In the code, we actually record the screen dimensions. So your screen dimensions, the developer's screen dimensions, we hard code that in. And you can see there we're putting in, so for example, on my screen, it's 1920 times 1080. I'm saying 1030 because I've deducted 50 pixels for the taskbar at the bottom. And then there's the setup. So design forms to work on your screen, record your screen dimensions, and then you need a resize factor, which I said before, which is the difference between, or the ratio between your developer screen and the user screen. But which ratio? So we'll have a look at that when we come to aspect ratio. So when we talked about the basic premise of the code, but here are some of the gotchas. So aspect ratio, form height, parent-child controls, tabs, navigation controls, subforms, and font size. So these are some of the things that you, once you start with the basic premise of the code, that you have to find solutions for in the code. So the aspect ratio is probably obvious to everyone here, but the ratio between the form height and the form width. To maintain the aspect ratio, whatever you use, you must apply the same ratio to both the height and the width. But what you need to do is determine whether width or height is the most challenged on the user screen when you're trying to fit your form on. So if we take an example here, we've got the pink screen is the developer's screen. It's a 920 times 1080 resolution. And we have in orange the user screen, which is lower resolution at 1400, 1050. And you'll notice that the shape of the user screen is not the same. It has a different aspect ratio. And what I found is the aspect ratio is probably more important than the actual resolution itself. Now on the developer screen, he or she has designed a form which would fit as it's seen there. And then when we try and put that on the user screen or render that on the user screen, I've used a 97% resizing factor. You can see that at the top, which is based on the height. Okay, so the 1050 divided by the 1080. So the 1050 height of the user screen divided by the 1080 of the developer screen. What happens when you resize like that? The form fits height-wise, but it doesn't fit width-wise. So in the next example, we've based the resize factor on the width. So we're taking the 1400 of the user screen divided by the 1920 of the developer's screen. We're getting a 73% resizing factor. And now the form fits on the screen, on the user screen completely, so width-wise and height-wise. So in the code, we look at two possible resizing factors, one for width and one for height, and we take the smaller of those. Now the other thing is form height. You should know there is not really a form height the form height is really determined by the combined height of its sections. So we have the AC header property, the property of the forms, or the sections are referred to by their code: AC header, AC detail, and AC footer. So you need to add the height of each of those form sections, which is what the code does here. So, and notice the error trapping in there. It skips errors because a given form may not have all of the sections. They might not have a header or a footer or a detail, might not have all of those sections. So when it hits an error trying to get the height of one of those sections, it just moves on. And then the height of those sections are added to get the total height of the form. And then we get the target height of those sections by applying a resizing factor. Another gotcha is parent-child controls. So what happens is that, let's take an option group where we have controls within the option group. If you, when I first tried applying my code, which was resizing the controls, the option group was not being resized to the dimensions that the code was telling it to resize to. And that's because the controls within that option group were being resized, and the option frame can't be smaller than the controls within it. So the order that you apply the resizing matters. The children have to be, which are the child controls, the controls within that parent control, so the option group, need to be resized first. So if the child controls are too big, you can't resize the parent control correctly. So examples of tabs and option groups. So in the code that I started with, Jamie Zernick's code, I couldn't find treatment of tabs. Now the other issue with tab controls is that the resizing the tab control, you need to resize the tab pages in order to resize the tab control. So rather than trying to resize the tab control itself, you need to first deal with the pages. So my code resizes the parent tab control by resizing the children tab pages, and that also involves changing the font sizes for the tab page captions. And so that's what the code is doing here. It's applying the resize factor to the font size. Now there's an issue with font size, and we'll come to that a little bit later on. So just keep that in mind, because there's an issue with granularity of your font size. Okay. So just make a mental note for that. We'll come to that. And the tab page, so we control the font size of the tab control, and then so the font size of the tab control. So sorry, I'm rambling on a bit. The font size of the tab control controls the font sizes that are shown for the tab pages. So it's the font sizes for tab pages are controlled at the parent level, that is at the tab control. And then we get to the tab pages, and we control we change the width and height by the resizing factor, but only after we've changed the font, which was step A there. Okay. And then we can then we can move on to the tab control itself and position it. And when we position the tab control, obviously the child tab pages move with it. Looking at parent-child controls, there's option groups, which I talked about earlier. So the approach that I have here is first to record the desired size and position of the controls in the option group and put them into an array. Okay. And then what I do is basically reduce the width and height of those controls to 0. And then I can move the option frame and the controls. And because the child controls within the option frame have 0 dimensions, they're not going to push around or limit the ability of the option frame to resize. So after I've resized the controls within the option frame to 0, then I'll move the option frame, and then I can resize everything according to the dimensions in the array. That was the solution I come up with, because the option frame just wouldn't behave itself when I was just trying to resize everything directly. So when the code runs, it's going to loop through all the controls, but if it comes to an option group or controls within an option group, it skips it and leaves those until last. So here is the code where the code's looping through the controls within the option frame, and then recording their original height, and then recording their desired resized height at the bottom, where it says columns 5 to 8, desired size and placement. And then it resizes those controls to 0. And then the option frame is oversized, so that it's got some wiggle room for the children to move into place, and then we'll resize it correctly after that's happened. So after we've oversized the option group, we'll relocate the option group or the option frame, and then we'll resize the controls within the option frame, and then we'll resize the option group. By the way, if anyone wants to ask questions as we go, that's fine. It's probably better than trying to sort of make mental notes of anything. So feel free to speak up.
I have a quick question for you, Greg. On the previous
Yep.
screen, it showed you took the option group and you multiplied it by 2. But how do you
Yes.
know? How do you know you've got that space available?
That's a good point. That's a good point. But it would be a very easy fix, because actually it doesn't matter. It's a really good point, and that could probably cause an error. It's a really easy fix though, because we don't care where that option frame is. We're going to move it. The end of the code, we're going to move it into the right position. Another way to do it is to move its top and left to 0. So it's in the top left-hand corner, and resize it to the full size of the form, right? Then move all your parent controls, your child controls to where they should be, and then resize, resize and replace the option group to where it should be. But it's a good point that could cause an error if that option group was on towards the right edge of the form. That might cause an error, actually, when I think about it. So it's a good point, Adrian.
That's why I put my comment in the chat. You probably won't have seen that yet.
Yeah, I haven't. Okay, I'll have to play with that some more, because I haven't. The code's been working so far, but maybe it just hasn't met the scenario that's going to mess it up.
Of course.
You could basically obviously, another way to do it is, resize the option group to its max, to the dimensions of the form.
Sure.
So move it to the move it to the top left, and then move your child controls into place, and then record where the top leftmost control is and the bottom right most control is, and then start moving that and resizing that control. But yes, there is a challenge there, as you mentioned.
Do you want to take some other questions now, or do you want to move on?
Yeah, any more questions so far?
Crystal has one about what event are you running the resizer code on?
When the form loads and before it becomes visible. So I actually hide the form, like I make it invisible, and it actually runs all the code, and then I change the transparency of the form back to 100%.
Oh,
Perfect.
yeah. Thank you, Greg. I also want to go back to the option groups because that's where I snagged. And but I like your idea of resizing the option frame first. So what do you do? Do you loop through all the controls? If it's an option frame, do you like make it big and then go through another loop?
Yeah. So the first thing I do is I loop through. So what the code does, it loops through all the controls, but if it determines that one of those controls belongs to an option frame, an option group, initially skips it, leaves that to the end. And then what it'll do is it will record the original position and size of the option frame and the option controls into an array, and then it will apply the resizing factor. So that's now we've got the desired position and the desired size post resizing. We haven't done it yet, but we've recorded where we want them to be and how big we want them to be. And then the idea is to then oversize the option group, but as Adrian mentioned, that could be a problem if the option group was too close to the right edge or to the bottom of the form. Typically, though, all of your controls are going to move. So in my code, there's a caveat in the code, which at the end I've got some issues that I cover that, why the code is not perfect. But basically my code downsizes it. So it assumes that the developer's got a decent screen and that you're trying to adjust for poor resolution screens. It doesn't upsize the form. But so typically your controls are going to be moving when you're reducing your form size, your controls are also going to be moving towards the top and towards the left, okay? And I think that's perhaps why I haven't been caught out so far with moving, like the issues that Adrian's mentioned so far. Based on Adrian's comments, they're going to do some more testing, but yeah, the idea is to oversize the option frame. That gives you the wiggle room to move your child controls around, and they're actually basically have 0 dimensions, and then we move them back out to their new dimensions once they're in place. So I don't know if I've rambled on or answered that question, Crystal, but
Oh, no,
that's that.
thank you very much. I think another good note to mention is that the resizing code also works if you're running an AccDe because it's code behind the form and it's not saved.
Run that by me again.
I'm not sure if it's the way you're doing it, but the way
Yep.
I did it was running well, it was a MDE or an AccDe, with forms that you can't save changes to. So it was
Yep.
just code running
Ah.
launched behind the form, but it still works, but it doesn't save all the changes that you've made. It just, runs each time you open the form. But
You wouldn't,
Correct.
the
would
point,
you
Correct.
would you necessarily want to save changes though? Wouldn't you want to keep
No.
a default?
yeah, yeah. Exactly. I generally say close the form, but don't let the user change whatever they might have done.
No, so that's correct. So I've actually got this on a solution for a law firm in Cambodia, and I did it because of, they had a lot of screens that were not up to scratch really. So I've run it in an AccDe. It doesn't save the form dimensions. They stay exactly as they were designed. And the reason that you don't want to save it, so I know you're thinking, what you're saying is, well, why don't we take it to the client once they run it then the application is permanently resized. You don't have to run the code anymore. The question is, what if they get a new screen? So their laptop or their computer's the same, but the screen's different. So you don't want to save it. You want to run it each time. It runs so fast. It's you don't notice, like you're not waiting for it to resize. So yeah, my approach is not to resize it. It does lead on to another topic, which Kent and I discussed, is that this solution probably should be classed. Okay, but we'll come to that in the discussion at the end. Is that okay, Crystal? Is that kind of does that what I'm saying kind of make sense?
Yes, thank you very much. And also, I am looking forward to what Kent says about the resizing stuff, because I spent a lot of time writing a resizer, but I didn't just catch on to what Greg just now said. It's like resize the option frame first. And then
Yeah.
the stuff inside it will work. Well, the stuff inside it didn't work for me because I didn't think of that.
It has
No,
to be
well,
resized.
it took.
Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, Greg, just very quickly respond to that. Has to be
Yeah.
resized first and then again afterwards.
Yeah. So resized, basically what I resized to 0, so that the option frame is not pushed around by the children, and then resize them back out to their new reduced sizes. But this took me so much troubleshooting. You know, when early in the presentation you talked about the basic premise of the code, it seems so simple, and I'd run the code, and I'm going, that's not right. No, and if your option groups weren't resized, perhaps your form section couldn't be resized. And it was just stepping through the code so many times before I got it. Now I'm wondering whether I should have done it all, because there's Kent pointed me out to some resizing code that's out there that I'll mention at the end of the presentation, because somebody else has done it as well, or at least one other person's done it, and apparently it works. So, but I spent so much time trying to find this.
Greg, I have what I think might be a solution for you and for Crystal on the option boxes. If you start by resizing the option control to 0 and maximum size, and then when you get to the children, you resize them to the position where the option control will be. So the top left where that will be. Once you've done that, you can then resize your option box to the destination size, and within that you can resize the children to the where they should be, their destination sizes.
Right, right. Yes. And the code that I wrote, of course, did the sections first. If they're going to grow, got to grow them first. If they're going to shrink, you got to shrink them last. But yeah, the option group was I just didn't see that was kind of like an analogy.
Yeah, and it took me a long time to work out what was going on, why it wasn't working. It wasn't fun, I can tell you, because I'm thinking there's nothing wrong with the logic. It seems so simple.
It seems that there has to be a joke in there somewhere about the children pushing the parents around, but
right. It's the way life works.
Oh, George, you are just so witty. I love
so yeah. Are we ready to move on again? Rick?
Yep, sure. Yep.
One other thing on the option groups.
Yep.
Cool.
I'm using Colin Ridhan's version of screen sizing, and he doesn't deal with that at all. The option groups seem to behave themselves when the controls are moved and resized.
Yep. That's amazing. Okay. Because that's the one I'm going to mention at the end, because after I'd gone through this epic sort of journey to develop this, Kent mentioned that there's code out there. I couldn't find it. Of course, the first thing I'm going to do is look online for the code, right? I don't want to develop it myself if it's already there. But I couldn't find it. I I didn't
I'll put
find
the
it. I
link in
found
the,
Jamie Zernig's.
I'll put the link in the chat. Where's
Oh,
the
it's at the
site?
end of the presentation.
Oh,
I've
oh, you got
it.
it already. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're talking about the code, not the product, aren't you, Greg?
I'm talking about the code. So,
Okay.
yeah, we'll come to it at the end, but it has been done. So, yeah. Anyway, I've done it, but not knowing that it's already been done before. So I'm going to mention Colin's one at the end.
Let's move on then.
Yep. So moving on to navigation controls. Again, navigation controls, I didn't find that in the starting code that I had. And that's probably because navigation controls probably didn't exist in 2003 or 2007 or whatever. I think they were introduced for the online version of Access, the Access projects, whatever you call them, because they're actually meant to be like a menu type option that you'd have on a web page, I think. So so that caused me grief. So just off topic, I like navigation controls. A lot of where you want to have sort of tabs that will show different subforms. You can have like a tab control, navigation control. I like navigation controls, but not exclusively. So I still use tab controls depending on the scenario. I'm not even going to say navigation controls are better than tabs. It's just that's right. That's the opinion I've held. But they've both got their place. So it's just horses for courses. Anyway, that was a little bit off topic. But I use navigation controls in my applications. So navigation controls, yeah, I had trouble resizing these, and what I found is that you need to resize the font size before you start doing the height and width of the buttons. So the navigation buttons height and width won't be reduced if the font is too large. So reduce your font size first. For the buttons, resize the font size before your height and width, and you could ignore the top, obviously, because the navigation buttons are going to follow the navigation control. Another caveat is my navigation controls, I've only ever used horizontal sort of buttons, but you can have vertical buttons apparently. I've never used them. So I don't know how that would work, if how my code would work on that. The width of the navigation button may be less than its caption. It could be that in the design, if it's poorly designed, the width of the navigation button doesn't actually show the full text of the caption. That's a design issue, but my code just tries to respect what's already there. Okay, so because what the first version of the code would do is resize the width of the navigation button according to the caption. But now what my code does is look at the width of the text, and if the width of the text is larger than the starting width of the navigation button, it'll try to respect that. So we process the children navigation buttons before we go to the parent navigation control. So similar issue to the option groups. So the width of the navigation may be less than its caption, so we check first. And then we resize the parent navigation control after we've dealt with the buttons. Subforms, when we're loading a subform, we determine if it's a subform, and obviously you don't have to worry about width and height for subforms, just resizing the controls. Because width and height of a subform is irrelevant. It's really determined by the width and height of the container. Now, the other issues are font sizes. When you're trying to reduce font sizes, you don't have a lot of granularity. So, if you're applying, say you had started with a 14 font and you applied your resize percentage and it comes to 10.22, well, you haven't got a font size of 10.22, so it's either going to be 11 or 10. So what I do is I resize the font, and obviously that rounds, and then I subtract 1. So it just gives me some wiggle room, because oversized font causes an issue when you're trying to resize the control that has that font. So that's basically most of the gotchas that they went through. So now we go to confession time and full disclosure. So the code only downsizes to a lower resolution. So what I'm assuming is that you as a developer have a decent screen to start with, and then you're trying to deal with sort of older, poor resolution screens. If I were to code it so that it would upsize for a greater resolution screen, then I would have to detect that and reverse the order of some of those, some of the coding potentially. The resize code only runs when the form opens. That comes to Crystal's questions. And it doesn't rerun if you move the form between monitors. So once it opens on whatever monitor's on, that's what it's resizing to. That issue could be overcome. I started to play with it and I haven't had time to take it any further, but to do that, you need to have it in a class, have that code within a class, which I haven't got at the moment. So the other confession disclosure is that the code doesn't have class. Yeah, the last confession is that after I'd done all this, Kent pointed me out to the fact that Colin Regan has already got some form resizing code out there, so you can also go and take a look at that. And he's got some blog posts up there with some running through the code. So there's a link there that you can look at if you want to also investigate that approach. So on to just an explanation of the demo app. This is what it sort of looks like. When the demo app opens, it comes up with a menu form. It's a pop-up form, and the yellow border is showing that it's using a navigation control. I put in some dummy navigation buttons with some long text, and that's just to try and stress it so that, because one of the issues was trying to reduce the width of the navigation control, and the limiting factor is also how many buttons and how much text. So I just threw them in there so that I could sort of try and break it, test if it really worked. But on the demo app, those buttons don't do anything, just so you know. These are the active navigation buttons here. On the home, I'll call it a home tab or home button, we've got a menu with some icons. And these are kind of twin icons. So we'll have one icon that will open a form that will resize, and the next one that won't resize. Okay. And then if we go to the alerts tab, we've got two versions of the alerts tab. So the alerts tab contains the dummy menu, and this is just to demonstrate the layout. Will that menu interface actually show correctly on a user screen with poor resolution? The alerts tab shown at orange, if you click on that button at the top left, will show a menu. It should resize and show correctly. But if you were to click on the adjacent button, alerts no resize, it would be off screen. Put in some things like an option group, combo box as well. So on the testing, you obviously have to change your resolution. So I've developed it on a 1920 1080 screen, so you change it to something lower than that before you started testing. So just some screenshots to show a comparison of how forms render on different resolutions. What I've done is taken some screenshots of those forms. So this is on the original 1920 1080 screen. This is what it looks like on my screen where I've developed it, and this is the way it comes out on a 1400 times 1050 screen with 125% zoom. So it all fits on everything that you had on the developer's screen is there and accessible on that user screen that has a lesser resolution. And here's another form with another aspect ratio and resolution, and it all resizes correctly. So that's the menu of the application. If we come to the next one, I've one of those icons, we've opened up a form here. And so that's on the original developer screen. On a 1400 screen, that's how it comes out, sized pretty much correctly. And here we have an even more reduced resolution. It still shows up correctly, pretty much. And then we've got a sample pop-up form, original developer screen. The next screen, 1400 times 1050 and 1280 times 800. It's all showing up correctly. Here we have a continuous form, the developer screen, the 1400 times 1050 screen, and the next and even more reduced resolution screen. Yeah. Just to note, if you look just on this one, I'd just like you to have a look down on that continuous form at the left column, which is the date. I mentioned earlier that when I round the font, I take it down by 1, whatever it comes out to, I reduce 1. When I wasn't doing that, these were, some of the dates were showing up as hashes. So that's why I decided just to always deduct 1 after the font calculation as shown as like it has come up with what it should be. I just deduct 1 from that. So discussion, any criticisms, feedback, questions?
There are some more comments in the chat. Crystal asked, do you put something in the tag property of a control to decide how it behaves? Like which images resize and which don't?
No, it doesn't use tags at all. It just resizes everything. Do you want to speak about that, Crystal? Because I'm not sure. I'm just trying to understand why you,
well, I saw your image and it's like you had 2 of the same thing and the right one said don't resize or it was
okay.
reversed. And that made me think, oh, well, you're going to leave the one on the left, whatever size it is, and just make the one no resizing. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry, I didn't
ask that question.
Yeah, I didn't explain it very well. But the point of this, the demo app, is that this is a menu, and if you click on the people icon at the far left, it will open up a form that will resize. If you then click on the adjacent people icon, which is labeled no resizing, when that form opens up, it will not resize. That was the point of the demo app. So these are actually icons to open up forms. And when those forms open up, some will resize and some won't, just for demonstration purposes.
Greg, sorry, for just as an idea, if you've got that to make it clearer what it is you'll show, because I had no idea either. If you made the first and the third and the fifth, if you made them the same picture but slightly smaller than the other ones, it might be clearer to people what it is that you're offering.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Yeah. Obviously, if you were to take the demo app and then make your own app, that would completely come out because you'd be resizing everything. It was just more for demonstration. But then I had an epiphany just before we're due to present that it might not be possible to easily change resolution on the fly during the presentation. So. But anyway, if you get the demo app, that's what it's all about. But yes, yep. But anyway, that wasn't well explained. So I hope that answers your question, Crystal.
Hey, Greg, Tom has another question. Tom, you want to unmute?
Yeah, sure. I was wondering if you ever use your code in combination with control anchoring.
No, well, I haven't thought about it. No. Do you want to talk about that?
Sometimes you may take over an application created by someone else, and you don't even know exactly what properties are being used. You think, hey, let me be smart. I throw in my resize code. And I'm just wondering which would win. You're trying to resize something, Access is trying to resize as well.
Yeah.
And I don't really know what would happen. Probably nothing good.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know the answer to that question. I do know that, like I've got the code in a production software and it's all working out well. But yeah, I don't know what to say about that. Yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. Any more
Any
questions?
other questions, comments?
Adrian, is that your hand up?
No, I was clapping, Greg, but I do have
Oh.
if it's quiet, I'm just digging back in the chat to see. Yes, one of the questions was sort of a question. The screen dimensions don't necessarily reflect the size of the window, if not maximized. Is there an assumption? Is your code based on the assumption that we ignore the window and work only with screen sizes?
I'm not sure I'm understanding quite yet.
You've got two different screens and you're taking it from a big screen going to a little screen.
Yes.
But what if access isn't maximized? It's not taking up the whole screen, it's only a window. People run that way, I've seen them. Bonkers, I know, because I never run access as a windowed thing because it doesn't make sense to me. But people do. And I wondered, would this throw your code, or would it be acceptable just to say, well, you don't have to run it in a window. This is what screen real estate you've got. If you choose to try and run that in a window, it's your own fault.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So a couple of things in my apps. I always try to hide the Access interface itself. So I'm always using pop-up forms. So yeah. So the forms that in my apps, when they show, they're already resized according to my screen. I just don't like users having the Access interface itself, because basically I'm trying to determine what the user can and can't do. I don't want them having access to anything else. So basically, yeah, that's the kind of way I write my applications. So I've not encountered that issue yet on my applications.
It's always one of the things I keep getting hit with is that I sit there and I do things my way, as makes sense to me, and talk to all these other access people all over the place, and they come up and do things differently.
Yes,
it's not really acceptable, but sometimes you have to deal with it.
It's quite annoying, isn't it?
Oh, ridiculous.
So there's another good question that's been asked a couple of times. You gave me the slide deck for the presentation. Will there also be a sample database that we can?
Yeah. I'll send that through. I'll try and tidy up a bit because there's some redundancies in there, so I'll try and clean it up and then send it through to you.
Okay, great. I will upload it to the AUG website. It'll be on the dashboard, and I would put that up and show you where it is with the shared screen. But I don't dare try such a outrageous move on my iPad.
No, sure.
But yeah, it will be on the Access Pacific dashboard page with the download.
Yep.
Okay, great.
There is a quick response to Brian's comment at the bottom there, which is you can sometimes, not always, but you can sometimes have scroll bars on a form. So if it does get too small, you can use scroll bars. Now, they don't always appear, and when you have to use them, they can be a bit of a nuisance because it's not as convenient as having a form with everything on it. But
no, Adrian, no, sorry, no, that was referring to a window. If you were running Access in a smaller window, you will get the application will appear with scroll bars, so you can resize the whole Access application.
Right. So not form. I'm with you. So when we're talking about if Access is shown in too small a window for whatever's on there at the moment, it will give scroll bars. Yes, you're quite right, Brian.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Also, as Greg said, these applications are generally assumed that the user is that's all they're seeing. They're just seeing that application. Now, if they're running it where they have access in a window, yeah, good point. They'll get scroll bars.
But who wants to be using an application where you have to scroll on scroll bars to see what you're doing, to get to different bits that you're doing?
Well,
Sure,
not developers, but let's look at end users. They're just in that application all day long.
yeah, so they don't want to be scrolling around, do they?
Yeah.
No, it's going to be their whole screen.
So that was one of the scenarios that I had when I first started looking this code for a production app, where I had a screen that had a lot of columns in there, and I went then one of the staff called me and said I can't close the form, and that's because I think I'd deactivated the scroll bars or something, so the close button was hanging outside the right edge of the form, and I had to put the scroll bars on, and it was horrible to use, like scrolling left and right to see what's on the screen. That's when I started the journey to the resizing code.
You didn't teach them about Control F4 then?
No.
Probably best not. It can be dangerous.
Yeah.
Okay, there's another gotcha as the developer. If you resize that form, or your program resizes a form, and then you go to design mode and save it, you're saving it on the new size. Do you understand? Say you're testing the system, the form resizes, and then, I got to change something. Go to edit mode on the form, make the change and save. It's now saved with the new size.
Yeah, okay. I mean, with the accde, that shouldn't be an issue.
Well, I'm talking about the developer. Obviously, the user's not going to be doing that.
Yeah.
I think you'd probably need the code to be in a separate module, wouldn't you, Ron?
Well, then you could just change.
Hang on, one conversation at a time, Crystal.
Well, I'm answering his question. You could just change close to save for the developer, and then comment that out, and then what you did will be saved, and you can not do it again.
Well, again, I've done it to myself. I had to restore a form from backup.
Yeah, I consider that kind of outside of the whole scope of form resizing for end users. Anyway, I mean, that's all in the world of it's all the adventure of being a developer.
Yeah, it doesn't affect the end user at all, but it affects the developer.
No, but Ron, I think you're still missing a point. I know Crystal changed the subject, but the point is you wouldn't have that in your form code. It's in your general module code. So if you save that, it won't have a problem. Why would you have such code in your form?
That's not what I'm talking about. If you open that, if you're testing your application,
yep,
you open the form and the code resizes the form.
Yep.
And now you say, okay, let's go edit the form. Now if you save those edits, you also save the resize. So I'm not talking.
Would edit the form. You would edit the design of the form after you change the size of it.
Yeah.
Well, then I'm afraid
that's a brain dead thing to do. But
you would only have yourself to blame.
Right.
That's
Again,
kind of the point.
It's a developer
very little sympathy with anyone that would do that.
Well, I've done
it.
Well,
I mean, my answer is I would go back to the previous versions, because as I develop, I have version 7, 8, 9, 10, and I would just import the previous form if I did mess it up like that. That's never happened to me, but yeah, I understand what you're saying. But the way is to have versions and then just import back the previous version.
I'm sure most of the rest of us have done that, or some variation of that.
Well, Colin's code has an unresizer function, so he must have done it too.
So Tom had another comment. You want to step in, Tom?
Yes, I will.
The tabbed interface.
Yeah. So I took note of the fact, Greg, that you said that you work mostly with pop-up forms, maybe exclusively, but not
Yes.
everyone does. For example,
No.
the Northwind sample application does not.
Yes.
It uses the tabbed interface.
Yes.
And the tabbed interface means that Access is doing some resizing for you when you resize the Access main window.
Yes.
And so I was wondering if your code takes that kind of modality into account, or is that lightly tested?
I would have to test it. I think it probably doesn't, because I try to avoid that. So I've written this code for the way I write apps, and I don't like tabbed forms at all. I don't like them. So I only want the user to see what I want them to see, and I want them to be also try to control the flow. Open one form, process what you do, close the form, go to the next menu item, not to be whipping around from form to form. Like I'm trying to take them on a logical journey through what needs to be done. But so I'm suspecting that my code might fail in your scenario.
Well, since the Northwind database is so popular, maybe you'll have a chance to pop in your code and see what happens.
Well, actually, now we're at the discussion, and George, you mentioned about, is it Shane, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, is my question is now whether this kind of code could become redundant? Is that what Shane's looking at? The kind of when he's looking at the 22-inch limit, would form resizing be part of that sort of discussion?
I don't think so, Greg. I think what we're doing, well, at the moment, the limit is because the value that's passed of the height and width, etc., is an integer and not a log.
Yeah. You're right.
Because the whatever the units are such that I think it's 22 inches in American parlance, and it's a certain number of centimeters that I don't have off the top of my head, probably about 50 odd in British or European parlance, but that it can't go above that because you specify the size, and even if you do it in inches, it converts it to these TWIP thingies, and you end up with getting into negative numbers and or overflowing completely. And what they're looking at is changing it so that you could specify a bigger number by making the value a long property instead of an integer property.
Yeah, I think that's the major part of what they're looking at now. But I think he is interested in collecting ideas for what people are interested in.
I'm looking at the post here on accessforever.org, and it says, in addition to the 22-inch limit, zooming the form and report view, vertical and horizontal growth of controls, depending on space and content and other points.
That's what I saw earlier today.
Yeah,
that's what I saw earlier today. That's why I was raising that issue.
Yeah. I was going to show that at the beginning of the meeting, but obviously my internet problems have prevented me. So thank you, Tom, for rescuing me.
So it looks like they have plans. Often their plans are a subset of what we would want.
Do you have a link, Tom, that you could put in the chat so I could?
Yeah, I do. Yes, I do.
I didn't quite catch everything you said. Sorry. I don't want you to spend your time going through it again.
I'm going to paste it right here.
Good man, thank you.
It seemed to be talking about zooming and
yeah. But again, as I pointed out, I think it's all you have to look at it, as Tom just said. They talk about a lot of things that someday will happen. Some of them have happened. This one, I think, is it would be really nice.
Under consideration.
Under consideration.
Post. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so we like. Sorry, George. I just say we like how you said that, Tom.
Yeah.
Crystal and I, often their plans are a subset of what we want.
Yeah. So I think it's about time for me to turn off the recording unless, so Greg, if you want to go ahead and wrap up, I'll stop the recording.
No, I'm pretty happy. I appreciate all the feedback and discussion. Some really good points have been raised, and as I've said, there are some limitations to the code that I've written, and that's because I wrote it specifically for my scenario. But no, thanks everybody.
Okay, great.
Thanks for being so kind as well.
Nice.
Well, thank you. Look forward to the next one. Oh, before I quit though, before I quit recording, I should say, Crystal, you and Jeff want to give us a quick, excuse me, a quick preview of next month's meeting presentation.
We'll be talking about add-ins. I'll be showing you how you can make and run an add-in using Access, and Jeff is going to show you how to make the picture bigger.
Jeff said earlier he might have to disappear for a short while. He hoped
I've got to see it. Okay, so he's going to show you how you can create an add-in using an Office interface.
Okay.
And yeah, he'll give a specific example, but he's going to be using Visual Studio and COM add-ins to accomplish that.